Some countries have no excuse to be bad at Eurovision. These are countries with huge and internationally acclaimed music industries, as well as massive amounts of money to spend on their entry and a native language that is basically more marketable than almost any other. Spain is one of the countries in that category. So why is it that once again at Spain's national selection for Eurovision, what we've seen has fallen far short of expectations? Today, we are going to go through that national final and look at why things didn't quite work out this year. We are going to be looking through each of the 8 finalists, which naturally will include the winner and Spain's Eurovision 2025 entrant as well. This year, we had the biggest fan favourite show up and flop, others come out of nowhere to deliver stunning performances which no one expected, and more than a couple of bum notes. We're going to go through it all, but before we do, very quickly, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel if you enjoy it. You can follow me and my editor Jay on social media. All of the details are in the description. And if you'd like to support us financially, you can do so on Ko-fi and Patreon. All the details, again, are below, and you get videos a day early if you become a patron. Finally, we are now live streaming every Sunday night at 8 PM UK time. That is 9 PM in Central Europe and 3 PM on the East Coast of the USA. Make sure not to miss that. Now let's get on to it. And I already mentioned bum notes and shaky vocals. That was actually pretty good timing because we're starting with a song that suffered from just that. This was the first song on the night of the final, and it was Daniela Blasco with her song, Ooh Na Na. Daniela was criticised after the semi-final for using very, very heavy backing vocals to mask her true voice. This is a trick that we're seeing increasingly often, both at Eurovision and at national selections, now that the rules around pre-recorded backing vocals have been loosened. To her credit, her vocal did seem a lot clearer in the final, so it seemed like they had toned this down a little. Unfortunately, with that clarity came a whole new set of problems. A song like this, by design, requires an active choreo and a really well thought out, put together stage show in order for it to work live. I have no doubt that if Daniela Blasco was stood still on stage doing nothing else but singing, she'd be able to sing this song perfectly. Unfortunately, when it came to doing that and dancing at the same time, it just didn't come together. The song itself can't really escape criticism either. One frequent complaint you're going to hear on this video, and one of the big arguments I want to make about this show in general, is that a lot of the songs were generic and unadventurous. There's nothing wrong with this song in the same way there's nothing wrong with quite a few of the songs in this selection. The problem is, if it wasn't in this show, there's 100 songs in a similar style that you would choose to listen to instead of this one. Once again, when you're doing something that many people have done before, like I always say, the bar is higher. You have more to do in order to live up to expectations. In terms of specific things that irritated me about this song, I did roll my eyes a little bit at the Crazy in Love style intro. We have Beyonce at home. Crazy in Love, in turn, sampled its intro from a 1970s track by the Chi-Lites. They then combined it with a modern hip-hop beat. That felt and still feels like an authentic tribute to the original record. Unfortunately, Ooh Na Na feels nothing like that. It's like they sat in the studio and thought, let's do an intro like Beyonce did in Crazy in Love. It's just a much cheaper equivalent. Daniela is only 19, so I don't doubt we're going to see a lot more of her in the future, whether that's in a Eurovision context or elsewhere. But I think it's probably for the best that this song didn't win the competition this year. It isn't the complete package, and Daniela needs to develop more as an artist before she's ready to go to Eurovision. Performing second in the final was Couve with her song Loca por ti. Estoy loca por ti. Estoy loca por ti. Estoy loca por ti. I'm pretty sure Couve would have been more than a little surprised to find that she was in Benidorm Fest, given how Melody Festival encoded this song is. Had it been in that show, it's exactly the kind of song that would make it to the second chance round, only to lose out there and not make it to the final. Given the songwriters and producers for this were all Spanish, I presume we can rule out the possibility that it was ever considered for that show though. In all seriousness, Couvet's presence in this final actually caught a lot of people by surprise because it wasn't fancied to make it through in the odds ahead of time. That said, it's a credit to her performance live on stage that after that it seemed like a clear qualifier. Despite a not very strong base in terms of the fairly generic song, she put herself in contention with a really good live performance. There were also elements of the staging I really liked, in particular this shot at the end, which really reminded me of Teresa and Maria from Eurovision last year. To be honest, having watched the first semi-final of Benidorm Fest this year, mostly from between my fingers, this was clearly a deserved qualification. Like I said, the song isn't particularly challenging, it's not particularly out there, but amid a blazing dumpster fire of bomb notes in that first semi-final, this really stood out simply for being in tune. It was slick and well executed, and it was performed to the standard that you would expect most of the artists should have reached. We saw another solid performance in the final, and the 6th place that Couvet achieved probably represented the ceiling of the possible ambitions for this song. There was nothing she really could have done to make it go any higher. With something like this, if you perform it well, you can get it somewhere, but that somewhere was never going to be the Eurovision stage. Next, we're talking about the What the Hell is a Polar Bear Doing in Arlington, Texas song in this final. That is Mawot with his song Raggio di Sole. This song came into Benidorm Fest dead last in the odds, and nobody gave it a chance in hell of qualifying. That included Mawot, whose reaction when he was announced as one of the jury's top 4 picks from the semi-final said everything we need to know about how he expected the results were going to go for him.
Mawot!
Before this show, Mawot was a total unknown with a couple of thousand streams to his name on Spotify and 0 social media presence whatsoever. For that reason, you genuinely have to give him some serious credit for stepping up and delivering to a high enough level to not only participate, but to get to the final. It may have been with a song which was about as interesting as Cardboard, but he still did it, probably owing mainly to the fact that his vocals were really solid on the night. Unfortunately, like I say, this song was just really dull, and I'm also very confused as to why whoever styled this performance decided that the energy Mawot needed to be giving was Avatar: The Last Airbender. I have a lot of respect for Mawot for getting this far, but realistically, last place in the final was the best he could have hoped for. Next, we're going to talk about a song, though, that was hoping for considerably more than that. That was the pre-show fan favorite Lachispa, coming to Benidorm Fest this year with her song Hartita de Llorar. From the moment that the studio versions of the songs for this year's Benidorm Fest were released, this stood out as a clear favourite. As a result, it shot straight to #1 in the odds as well. Unfortunately, the curse of Fusa Nocta from 2022 came to haunt Lachispa this year. This was especially true in the semi-final, where she delivered a less than stellar vocal performance. We should be clear that this wasn't a Fusa Nocta level of tunelessness. She did at least hit some notes, but it was bad. And when you have a song as aggressive vocally as this is in the chorus, the level of exposure is really brutal when you get it wrong. One of the risks that comes with bringing something this musically adventurous to a contest like this is that there is the potential to crash out in a big way live. Unfortunately, that is what happened to Lachispa in the semi-final. It did improve pretty dramatically in time for the final, but by then a narrative has been set. Even though she beat expectations in the final, that was only because she had dragged them down by such a calamitous amount with her first performance. In addition to that, the performance wasn't the only thing stopping this from finishing at the top of the scoreboard. I really enjoyed the studio version of this, and when I first listened through to all of the studio versions for this year's contest, this was probably my favourite. I found the choruses to be really powerful and emotional and raw, and I was really excited to see how that would translate on stage. Then I saw the performance, and unfortunately, live, I just feel like I'm being shouted at. This was a complaint that a lot of people had with Blanca Paloma in 2023. At the time, I was one of Blanca Paloma's biggest defenders, and I thought that song would finish in the top 3. Unfortunately, I now find myself on the other side of the argument in 2025 with this song. I understand that the aggressiveness of the vocals are meant to communicate how raw Lachispa's emotions are. This is a really visceral song, and she's telling telling us a story of pain. So it's not like it's going to be all smooth around the edges and not have any roughness to it. But honestly, I found myself getting a little startled. I'm certain that a Spanish audience with the kind of understanding of the Spanish musical tradition would have got it more than me. But given the way that it dramatically fell down the odds after the semi-final, I think a lot of Spanish viewers probably thought the same that I did. There's also been a lot of complaints about the way this is staged, and I agree in some respects, but not in others. There's been a lot of discourse about whether the Spanish broadcaster ever really knew what they wanted to do visually with this song. And I'm not sure whether the total lack of colour in this performance was an artistic choice or whether they just didn't really know what way to take it. That said, I still do think it was one of the strongest stagings in the show. It did at least somewhat contribute to the message of the song, and there were a few clever visual tricks involving mirrors and so on, which I thought were pretty cool. Overall though, I think the pre-show favourite status really didn't do Lachispa any favours. The expectations were really elevated, and as a result, she was set up to fail if she delivered anything other than total perfection. On this occasion, she wasn't able to deliver that, and because of that, 5th place is probably about right for where this should have ended up. On the same note though, while some songs do come in as fan favourites and disappoint, others come in totally unheralded and then absolutely bring the house down. That is exactly what happened with Mel Omana. She participated this year with her song, I'm a Queen. This came out of nowhere in the semi-finals, grabbed us by the scruff of the neck and said, you need to pay attention to me. And we did. Out of the entire field in Benidorm Fest this year, nobody elevated themselves from the studio version to the live version on stage like Mel Omana did. This is the only song in the entire show where we can genuinely say the vocals were on the money for every single note. It was perfect. In addition to that, in terms of pure technical skill, I think it's very clear that Mel Omana was the most gifted vocalist in the entire show. There were things she did with her voice in the course of these 3 minutes that I genuinely was really surprised to learn weren't in any way modified in post-production. She's just able to make all of these interesting sounds and different tones with her voice.
Camino, camino, camino pa'lante, camino de flores, camino diamante, camino difícil, no hay nada que me aparte, el foco es la cima.
The clear advantage that Mel had in this area over literally the entire field was only magnified by the fact that so many of her rivals were having constant problems trying to stay in tune. I had honestly completely forgotten what this song had sounded like immediately after I first listened to it in the studio. I had little expectation either of it ever troubling my personal favourites, but to be honest, having seen the show, this was my favourite of the lot. This touches on one of my favourite things at Eurovision, which is when a song comes out of nowhere and surprises you in the best possible way. It doesn't happen often, but when you get someone who you've maybe a little unfairly written off before you've heard them sing live, and then they force their way back into the conversation like this, it really does just make the whole thing so special. And it again goes to show why these kinds of shows are so exciting. You never know what you're going to get until you hear it on the night. I talk frequently on this channel, and I've already talked about it in this video, about the standard you have to meet if your song isn't strong enough to stand on its own. And it is so rare that the standard is met to this degree that it pushes the song back into contention again. To be honest, with the benefit of a few days to process the results, I'm genuinely a bit disappointed that the juries only placed this in 4th. Before the show, it might not have seemed possible for her to even get that high, but I don't really see what Mel Omana could have done any more than what she did. Daniela Blasco scored 10 more points than Mel Omana did from the jury. And that was a song that, when I talked about it earlier in this video, I spent most of my time trying to find nice ways of saying that she wasn't in tune. This really calls into question how the jury criteria are being applied and how the jurors are awarding their points. You need this kind of thing to be adequately rewarded. And in addition to that, when there are bad vocal performances, yes, they need to be penalized. Given the pre-show expectations, Mel will have been very happy with a 4th place finish. And for me, I'm just delighted to have been surprised so positively by a song in this selection. I just think that while it was never going to win, it did just deserve a little more recognition from the juries than it got. We're going to move on from my personal favourite to the song that, when all things are considered, probably should have been the Eurovision entry. That is Jota Cabello with his song VIP. This was one of the pre-show favorites, and to be honest, with the downfall of Lachispa, I thought that Horta Cabello would probably end up being the beneficiary of that. By the end, knowing that it was never realistic for Mel Omana to be in with a chance of winning, of the 3 songs that looked likely, this was the one that I threw my weight behind. When you're sending an entry to Eurovision, you need to sell an artist and a story just as much as you need to sell the song that they're singing. If there is one thing that this entry gets right, it is this. You need Horta Cabello to come across as confident, almost to the point of arrogance. Because in order for this song to work, you need him to embody this archetype of a villain or a bullfighter. He needs to strut in the way that the song demands that he struts. In my opinion, in this specific case, I thought they really nailed it. A lot has been said about the vocal performance in this song, and it's true that this is far from the finest vocal performance that I've ever seen in my life. The one thing that saves it, though, to an extent, is that this song kind of sings itself. It's in a mostly fairly low register. As well as that, it's sung in a style that makes the bum notes less noticeable. Because of that, our attention stays focused on the other elements of the performance. That's a good thing, because there were genuinely some really interesting tricks in here, staging-wise. I was a particularly big fan of the phone lights effect in the bridge, and I really liked the face paint exposed by the black light earlier on. The execution on these moments wasn't quite perfect, and more widely, it didn't feel like they got the concept exactly right. But at the same time, it still made sense, it fit the song, and it elevated the performance as a whole. In my opinion as well, the song is one of the few that stands up to scrutiny when compared to similar songs in the genre. When we apply the same test as before and ask ourselves, would we listen to this out of a Benidorm Fest context? In my case, the answer would be probably yeah. Crucially, going forward to Eurovision, you could take a very similar stage concept, tighten it up around the edges, and then pretty much plonk it down as a functional mid-table finishing entry. That is a pretty underwhelming way to finish this thought, but the reality is, in this show, that was the best thing that anyone could have hoped for. Unfortunately, Horta Cabello did fall just short on this occasion, and I do think that's a missed opportunity for Spain. In an ideal world, this wouldn't be a national finals best prospect, and it would simply be one among a series of strong potential contenders. Unfortunately, this time there was nothing on the table of similar quality among the potential winners. That meant not sending this was a big mistake. We have one more song to talk about before the winner, and this one I have an extremely specific personal beef with. That is Lucas Boone with his song Te escribo en el cielo. Because of this song alone, my entire stream last Sunday got demonetized. I played it on stream for 1 second too long. As a result, Lucas Boone's record label took all of my ad revenue. So, thanks, I guess. As for the actual song, this made it to the final of the show on a very simple basis. Amid a storm of terrible vocal performances around him, Lucas was actually very good. This meant that he came in the top 4 with the jury in the semi-final, and duly ended up in the final as well. The standard in the final was of course higher, and to his competitors' credit, everyone did improve on the Saturday night. For that reason, Lucas's stock fell dramatically, and he ended up the show in 7th place, only beating The Last Airbender. As for the song, it's unfortunately just a little dull. Despite how pretty Lucas's voice is, that just leads to it falling flat. That in turn limits how far it was ever likely to go in the competition. That said, it's no surprise that there is a small but very loyal cohort of fans who really love this song. That specifically centered around the message of the lyrics. This is a song written to somebody who has passed away. I will freely admit that not speaking Spanish is probably inhibiting me having a connection to this song, and that if I spoke Spanish, I would probably feel a little differently about it. I am, after all, a bit of a sucker for that kind of song when it's sung in English. Before we talk about the winner, I unfortunately have a series of not very charitable things to say about this show on the whole. This is a show that is getting a lot wrong, it's getting more wrong every single year, and it is rapidly losing its way. I will say though that I still thought the show was well presented. The production in general did take a step forward from last year despite a few mishaps, and there were some artists who genuinely really did positively surprise me, none more so than Mel Omana. In addition, there were at least a couple of viable propositions for Eurovision among the participants. Unfortunately, these are all silver linings on a much bigger cloud. Spain's music industry is among the strongest in the world. And in terms of cultural relevancy, when it comes to language, only English can really claim to be bigger than Spanish. As a country, Spain has so much to give musically, and that makes it totally inexcusable that the national broadcaster produces a show of this quality. This is simply nowhere near strong enough, and the unfortunate truth of the matter is a lot of the problems we have identified, whether it's the dubious song quality or the not very good live performances, stem from the fact that right now, the way Benidorm Fest is structured, it is not attracting the top talent in the Spanish music industry. The best and brightest are not bothering. I discussed this with Spanish and Spanish-speaking creators on the Euro POV podcast a few weeks ago, and I found it really striking that even though they naturally had more of a connection to the songs than I did because they understood the language, they had arrived pretty much at the same conclusions that I did. If it weren't for Benidorm Fest, we wouldn't be listening to basically any of these songs, because we'd be listening to the much better examples of songs in the same genre that already exist. This is the key failure of Benidorm Fest. Other countries are able to pull in either their best and brightest, or at least some of the best upcoming talent in their country. Benidorm Fest has been able to do this in the past too, and it's produced huge hits like Noche Entera from 2022. Where is the Noche Entera among these songs? Where is the Chanel? They don't exist because the quality of artist has massively fallen. As a broadcaster, RTVE has to carry the ultimate responsibility for that. The Spanish Eurovision fandom is one of the biggest in the world, and Spain as a country is one of the world's biggest musical powerhouses. Spanish fans deserve so much better than what their broadcaster has been serving them over the last couple of years. Because when you are a global music powerhouse, there is no excuse for standards this low. By the way, the same goes for the UK, France, and Germany, because out of the big five right now, Italy is the only one that is coming anywhere close to living up to the potential. Benidorm Fest was one of my favorite national finals in 2022 and 2023, and genuinely, it really hurts to see how much it has fallen since then. I was so excited to see what could have been built from that really strong foundation in the first couple of years. But since then, all we've seen is decline. There needs to be a big change of direction, and it needs to happen now. Because as long as this is going on, we are not going to see the kind of Spanish success at Eurovision that we all know that they're capable of and that the fans are desperate for. We got a glimpse of what could be in 2022, and just like with the UK in the same year, that excitement and that potential has been squandered. This ship needs to be turned around before it's too late. Quick intermission for a second. This is Gabe from the future because the split results of Benidorm Fest have just been released. And to be honest, they are completely wild because the jury votes to me make no sense. How did Lachispa score 83 in the semi-final where she was terrible, and then 48 in the final where she was much better? Mel Omana won the jury in her semi-final, but finished 4th in the final. In addition, this isn't a 50-50 system because the televote can only give between 32 and 80 points, and the jury vote can give between 16 and 96. That means that the jury, in effect, has more power. I do not understand how you can think that Melody, Horta Cabello, and especially Daniela Blasco, whose performance in the final was really dodgy vocally, were suddenly better than Mel Omana. I don't really have much of a coherent point to make here, but this is just completely wild and makes no sense, so I wanted to mention it now. Amid that inauspicious context, let's talk about the winner of the show and Spain's Eurovision entry for 2025. That's Melody, with her song Esa Diva. This one had a pretty tough start to life in Benidorm Fest after the music cut out halfway through her semi-final performance. Then after that, Melody's attempt at the big note in the bridge went a bit wrong. There was no such repeat in the final, and the song did go off without a hitch. There was, however, one very specific moment of staging that really caught me off guard. In the final chorus, in her final performance, Melody misses a vocal cue in order to pull her hair into a ponytail and spin it around. I'm told that this is one of two things: either an inside joke that I've completely missed, because she does this frequently at her shows, or alternatively some kind of deep and beautiful cultural expression, and that I'm therefore some kind of ignorant fool for not appreciating it as such. Here's the thing, it was really entertaining, and it was, to be honest, probably the highlight of the performance for me. But it's just so naff. It completely removed all other traces of this performance from my head because that was all I could think about when I thought about this song. That said, given the song, that might be a good thing. Melody previously tried to participate in Eurovision in 2009, but she lost in the Spanish national selection that year on a tiebreak to Soraya. If I was unfamiliar with this selection and you had told me that this was the song that she had entered with in 2009, I probably would have believed you because it's extremely dated. Honestly, this vibe probably felt cliche and dated in 2009 as well. I do want to say something controversial here, which is that there are a lot of rose-tinted glasses among the supporters of this song because it is not a viable package for Eurovision in the slightest. This is the same kind of basic schlager that we rightly criticize when it shows up in Nordic national finals every single year. Given that the production team for this involved Linnea and Joy Deb and Thomas Gison, the same DNA runs through this song as well. Had an identical performance being delivered by a singer who doesn't have the profile that Melody does, it would have got nowhere near the victory. I do understand the appeal of Melody to a generation of Spanish young people who grew up with her music, because she was first a child star before becoming a musician in her own right as an adult. But that isn't a good reason to send this to Eurovision, and that essentially follows the same logic that the UK followed with Bonnie Tyler. Just because Holding Out for a Hero is great doesn't mean that Believe in Me was going to be any good. It wasn't. And the fact that it was Bonnie Tyler shouldn't have prevented us from looking at that and going, this isn't right. I don't doubt that many Spanish people loved El Baile del Gorila in 2001, but this song is no El Baile de Gorilla. Melody has bags of charisma, and she always has. That is part of the reason she's been so successful in the Spanish music industry for so long. She's a beloved figure for a lot of Spanish people for that reason. Unfortunately, that isn't going to save her from a really poor result in Basel because this song is not suited to the contest at all. Spain deserves better options than this, and better options than the other songs that were in this national final. With that, we have come to an actually quite somber end, and I'm genuinely sad about this because I see the passion of the Spanish fans, and I look at the kinds of things that are going on in the Spanish music industry, and I simply do not understand how year after year we produce this kind of mediocrity. I really hope that the Spanish fans who are really proud of this entry understand that this is coming from a place of wanting Spain to be successful in Eurovision, and from a place of frustration that I can see the Spanish broadcaster making the same mistakes over and over again, and as a result, not making any progress towards that goal. I know you want the kind of success that you got a taste of in 2022. I just don't think that this is the path that is going to take you there. We have come to the end of this video, and just before I go, don't forget to like it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you'd enjoyed it. We release videos every Friday night at 7 p.m. UK time, and we are streaming every Sunday night live at 8 p.m. UK time. I really hope I'll see you there, but in the meantime, thank you for watching, take care, and I'll see you soon.